All right, welcome everybody to our boundary training part 2, part 3. This is a required part of our training. You all should have received a login information for the online training, and we know that many of you are still in process of getting that done. Those of you who are not retired, because we gave the retired pastors a little bit longer, if you're not retired, you're supposed to have it done by tomorrow, just so you know. The retired pastors have till the end of November to complete it. So I'm Jean Raddick. I'm the Presbytery leader, along with Steve Shusett, our stated clerk. We will be presenting tonight. We will be presenting our presbytery policies and some of our interpretation of those policies. It is not sometimes easy material to go through, so it may feel a little dry, and we're sorry about that. But we do need to do this in order to complete our requirements for boundary training as part of our policy and our insurance requirements. So we will be doing that tonight. We will first do the Presbytery sexual misconduct and anti-harassment policy, followed by the child protection policy, confidentiality, and Steve will do a presentation on the Ministry Safe program that we have, because now all councils, not just presbytery, but sessions, have to provide boundary training, and he will explain how this is a tool that you can use for that. We will then also look at our ethical standards, and then we'll do some questions overall. You can ask questions after each presentation, but then we'll have an overall one at the end. So that's our schedule for the evening. So we'll just get started because that's a lot of information. So let me go to share the screen and we'll just get right started. All right. This is the Presbytery of the Highlands sexual misconduct policy and procedures. It is the policy of the Presbytery of the Highlands that all teaching elders, temporary members, officers, ruling elders, employees, and volunteers of the presbytery are to maintain the integrity of the pastoral, collegial, employment, and professional relationship at all times. Persons who engage in sexual misconduct are in violation of the principles set forth in Scripture and also of the pastoral, collegial, employment, and professional relationship. It is never permissible or acceptable for a member, officer, employee, or volunteer to engage in sexual misconduct. It is the policy of the presbytery that all teaching elders, I already said that, but that's here's the policy. I was one ahead of myself. Basic principles. The ethical conduct of all who minister in the name of Jesus Christ is of vital importance to the church, because through these representatives, an understanding of God and the gospel's good news is conveyed. Their manner of life should be a demonstration of the Christian gospel in the church, in the world, and that is Book of Order 2.0104. So there are basic principles of conduct guiding this policy, and they are as follows. Sexual misconduct is a violation of the role of teaching elders, temporary members, officers, ruling elders, employees, and volunteers who are called upon to exercise integrity, sensitivity, and caring in a trust relationship. This improper conduct breaks the covenant to act in the best interest of other persons within the presbytery. Sexual misconduct is a misuse of authority and power which breaches Christian ethical principles by misusing a trust relationship to gain advantage over another for personal pleasure in an abusive, exploitative, and unjust manner. If a ruling elder, employee, or volunteer initiates or invites sexual content into the relationship, it is the responsibility of the teaching elder, temporary member, or officer to maintain the appropriate role and prohibit a sexual relationship. Sexual misconduct occurs when a person in a relationship of power takes advantage of vulnerability of persons who are less powerful and unable to act for their own welfare, including children. It is antithetical to the gospel's call to work as God's servant in the struggle to bring wholeness into a broken world. It violates the mandate to protect the vulnerable from harm. These are the definitions of sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct is in the comprehensive term used in this policy to include child of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, rape, sexual conduct, sexual malfeasance, misuse of technology. And you will find specific definitions for these are listed in the sexual misconduct policy. So I will not review them tonight. The presbytery takes all allegations of sexual misconduct seriously. The principles of our response include, in responding to allegations of sexual misconduct, all should seek healing and assure the protection of all persons, meaning that privacy and confidentiality of communication should be maintained. It doesn't mean stories won't get out, but it will not come from those who are investigating the allegations. The presbytery should seek to uphold the dignity of all persons involved, including persons who are alleging harm and persons who are accused of sexual misconduct. Presbytery has jurisdiction over its members, temporary members, officers, ruling elders, employees, and volunteers. If one of these is alleged to have committed an offense, then the presbytery has the duty to inquire into the allegations. Allegations are always considered an allegation of offense against Scripture. Allegations trigger the disciplinary process. And I'll say that again. Allegations trigger the disciplinary process. The presbytery has a duty to hear the allegations of offense and take measures to prevent future occurrences of harm. Reporting the requirements. A person needing to report shall, if you need to report an allegation of sexual misconduct, they shall report to the stated clerk for guidance. Allegations should be made to the stated clerk if the person is a minister. Allegations should be made to the stated clerk or presbytery leader if the person is a ruling elder, volunteer, or employee. When we're receiving the reports of allegations will never be taken lightly or disregarded. Reports are matters of highest confidentiality. Reports shall be taken to the stated clerk, and allegations of misconduct of minors shall be immediately reported to the stated clerk and to the civil authorities. In New Jersey, clergy are mandated reporters. So I'll say that again. New Jersey clergy are mandated reporters. The Book of Order also mandates reporting. Both members and non-members may report allegations to the stated clerk. I'm really going to point this one out because this what it means to be mandated. Members of the presbytery, deacons, rulers, ruling elders, and educators shall, that's a big word, shall report child abuse to the ecclesiastical and civil legal authorities. So you are mandated to report it to us and to the civil legal authorities. Again, here's a presbytery response. Church discipline rules are triggered. The stated clerk will report to the presbytery the offense that has been alleged and proceeding with the church discipline rules. An appropriate response is the stated clerk will implement the response as directed by the rules of discipline. So that's just when the rules of discipline are triggered, this is what happens. As is required from the book of order, all councils shall adopt and implement a sexual misconduct policy. All councils include the session. This has been in the book of order for quite a few years. Many times our churches probably passed that policy when it came into the book. I'm going to say it's probably almost 20 years now or more. And then not too long ago, for insurance purposes, you had to present your policy, and people were saying, well, we don't have one. Well, you probably did, but no one has kept up with it. So it's really important that you know where it is, you know when it was approved. It should be available to all leaders of the church, teachers, everybody who works should have access to the sexual misconduct policy of your church. All councils, which includes session again, shall have general liability insurance policy specifically covering sexual abuse and molestation. We have had churches say, well, we don't have children, so we don't need that policy. Yes, you do. One is it's required, and this doesn't always just mean that sexual abuse of children. Employment practices, there needs to be a record keeping of all hiring and supervision practices of staff and others. There will be pre-screening of applicants and references. These are for people who are hired. And in this presbytery, that includes a criminal background check and a presbytery to presbytery reference check for all incoming members of the presbytery. So ministers coming into the presbytery, they will have a background check and they will have a presbytery to presbytery reference check. It is required. Each congregation shall have background checks and other items needed for employment and for volunteers, as in your sexual misconduct policy and your child protection policy. And you need to keep records of all these. You know, you can't just say, oh yeah, we did that. Well, can we see the background check? You know, you need to have copies of it. This is part of our policy that there has to be education. There'll be education that includes common knowledge regarding professional and ministerial boundaries, which is in your training that you did, that is what has happened. And you have to have knowledge of the sexual misconduct policy, which is what we are doing now. All minister members of the presbytery have to read the policy and sign a form that they have read it. We may be expanding that to everybody who has to do boundary training. So don't be surprised in the next few months that you get an email saying you need to read this and sign that you have read it. So that is probably coming. So also every 3 years, all active members and CREs, certified and associate Christian educators, inquirers and candidates for ministry, newly ordained pastors and retired pastors, new pastors to the presbytery, pulpit supply pastors or elders, and presbytery staff all have to participate in this training every 3 years. In the appendix of the policy, there are other items that come along the process of the response and that kind of thing. And what happens in a disciplinary case. So that is also for you to review, but we will not have to review that tonight. Any questions about the sexual misconduct policy before we get into the anti-harassment policy? Okay, I can't see your hand, so you have to speak up if you have one. All right, then let's move into the anti-harassment policy. This is new-ish. Came into the Book of Order in July of 2023. All councils have to have a anti-harassment policy. And people are saying, well, can't the sexual misconduct policy cover that? And the answer is no, because it's slightly different. And also the Book of Order says it has to be separate. So that's part of it. But there are different issues that can be covered by this one. It's not covered by sexual misconduct. There is overlap, though. The Presbytery of Highland strives to create and maintain an environment in which people are treated with dignity, decency, and respect. When the Presbytery of Highlands gathers to do its work as a council or committees or commissions or staff, it is committed to providing an environment that is characterized by mutual trust and is safe and free from harassment, bullying, and intimidation in any form. The Presbytery will not tolerate any type of harassment of its employees, minister members, ruling elders, volunteers, or ministry partners. All members and employees, the employees the employees is spelled out in the Presbytery handbook of the Presbytery, regardless of their role or position, are covered by and are expected to comply with this policy and to take appropriate measures to ensure that the prohibited conduct does not occur. Appropriate disciplinary action in accordance with the Book of Order or the Presbytery personnel policy will be taken against any member or employee of the Presbytery who violates this policy. Based on the seriousness of the offense, disciplinary action could be removal from a role or a position. As used in this policy, the term harassment includes sexual as well as actions, jokes, words, or comments based on an individual's sex, race, color, national origin, age, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or any other legally protected characteristic. Any action may be considered harassing if it creates a hostile, intimidating, or offensive work environment, unreasonably interferes with employees or Presbytery members' work or performance, or adversely impacts an individual's employment or volunteer opportunities. And the following are examples of harassment that sometimes we don't even realize it falls into that category. Microaggressions. A microaggression is a verbal or nonverbal slight that impacts an individual who might identify as being from a marginalized or non-mainstream community. Microaggressions are typically indirect, subtle, even unintentional, but nonetheless are considered discriminatory to the recipient. Some actual examples are, you speak good English, which could mean to that person, aren't American. A store owner follows a customer of color around the store. Or someone may say, you're a girl, you don't have to be good at math or science. Or a comment might be, men and women have equal opportunities for achievement. And there's a long list of other types of microaggressions. And sometimes, as you can hear from some of these examples, people may not intentionally mean something offensive, but it does come across that way. Bullying. Bullying is a pattern of behavior in which the bully attempts to intimidate their victim. Examples of bullying behavior range from teasing to extortion to physical assault. In addition to physical interactions, bullying includes any form of interpersonal, including electronic communication. Examples of bullying could be insulting a person or calling them names, unfairly blaming or criticizing someone, shaming, humiliating, or ridiculing a person, spreading rumors about someone, disseminating harmful or humiliating content about a person, sharing a person's private information, touching a person without consent. And I think we can all think of other examples of bullying that we have either experienced or have seen. I'd like to say we didn't do it, but workplace violence. Workplace violence is acting or using words to make an individual feel endangered. This includes actions that create actual harm or another individual to another individual, or words that result in another individual having a reasonable belief that they are in danger. Conduct that threatens, intimidates, or coerces another employee, presbytery member, or a member of the public at any time will not be tolerated, and this includes any form of electronic communication. We have electronic communication is out of control when it comes to harassment. Examples of workplace violence is physical assault, verbal abuse, swearing, yelling, or using inappropriate language, threats directly or indirectly, psychological intimidation like making false or malicious or derogatory statements, abuse of authority, spreading rumors, property damage, damaging, hiding, or stealing someone's personal belongings or work equipment, and ageism of discriminating against someone because of their age. Sexual harassment, which is also covered by the sexual misconduct policy, is defined as an unwanted sexual advances or visual, verbal, or physical conduct of sexual nature. This definition includes many forms of offensive behaviors and includes gender-based harassment of a person of the same sex as the harasser. This includes any form of electronic communication. Examples, comments or jokes about sex or private body parts, sharing of letters, notes, emails, text, instant messaging, or online posting that talks about sex or private body parts, harassment, anyone for not fitting their idea or social gender norms, exposure of body parts, private body parts, blocking someone's path so they can't get away from sexual harassment, and the list goes on, but those are some examples. Prevention practices and reporting and responding procedures, very similar to the sexual misconduct. First, I want to point out, as part of our prevention practices, there will be anti-harassment training included in a 3-year cycle, starting, they may have even started this year, but next year for sure. But there will be early in next year a anti-harassment training for everyone. So we will implement that right away. There will be one big workshop. Everyone will be expected to participate. More information about that will be coming in December, but it'll be sometime in January, February. Then we will fall into our 3-year cycle. The Presbytery has established the following procedure for lodging a complaint of harassment, discrimination, or retaliation. The Presbytery will treat all aspects of the procedure confidentially to the extent reasonably possible. Complaints should be submitted as soon as possible after an incident has occurred, preferably in writing. Complaints should be submitted to the COM, co-moderators, or the presbytery leader. However, if it is in the nature of sexual harassment, it should be submitted to the stated clerk. Normally, the complaint will be shared with the COM co-moderators, who will determine if the complaint should be forwarded to the COM response team or to the stated clerk for disciplinary action. But hear me say, if it's sexual harassment is the complaint, then it goes directly to the stated clerk. A complaint has the right to, the complainant has the right to initiate the disciplinary process established in the Book of Order by sending the complaint directly to the stated clerk. But also, even if they don't wish to start the disciplinary process and they want to have some guidance on what they think is sexual harassment, they should contact the stated clerk. The responding procedure depends on who is making the complaint. Elders, church members, deacons, volunteers should first consult with their session. Staff members should consult with the organization's personnel policy, and minister members should consult with the Committee on Ministry. If none of those takes action, the complaint should be brought to the presbytery leader or the stated clerk. So if in doubt, contact the COM co-moderators, presbytery leader, or the stated clerk on what to do. Remembering that Jesus continued to associate and eat with Gentiles and tax collectors, the recommended means of response is to focus on grace rather than on judgment, and education more than discipline in all but the most intentional of the most intentional acts of harassment. So in such as a microaggression or such, it is best to err on the side of grace. And so it is not to diminish or dismiss the offense, but rather to name it gently rather than in anger, to recognize people come into the subject matter with a variety of backgrounds and history, and to acknowledge that consequently the time, length, and intensity of a new understanding will vary from person to person. So this requires mutual conversation and formal, informal courses of study designed to equip more than to reprimand or punish. So we need to not, in all cases, jump directly to the disciplinary process. But the final resort is the Book of Church Discipline. Also in the responding, the Committee on Ministry, this is in the policy, the Committee on Ministry shall maintain a team of trained conflict management facilitators and mediators who will assist the presbytery, pastors, and congregations in times of disagreement. This conflict response team will be called upon to assist in the resolution of a harassment complaint that has come before the COM's attention. They will also be available to assist session and church leaders with the resolution of conflicts within a congregation. The conflict response team will report to the stated clerk and the COM moderators the outcome of the resolution process. All complaints and outcomes of the complaints will be confidential. This is something the COM does not have a strong response team at that. We have a few people who do that, but that is slated for the early in next year, is to train a conflict response team. And even today we were working on finding leadership for that training. So that will happen and that will be available after the first of the year. The Presbytery of the Highlands shall provide regular anti-harassment training to ensure an environment free of sexual and unlawful harassment. Minister members are expected to complete the initial training, which will be announced in December and sometime early next year, and will participate regularly in anti-harassment education training opportunities. Anti-harassment training will be part of the required boundary training for minister members, certified ruling elders, presbytery staff, and others that are already required to do this. The other policy that the presbytery will be actually voting on at the next presbytery meeting will be the anti-racism policy in November. We are not reviewing that tonight, but please note that on Monday night at 7 o'clock, there is training on how to write a anti-racism policy. So all councils have to have one. So I recommend, if you're not there, someone from your church should be there so you can write that, have the tools to write that policy for your church. Are there any questions? I know that's a lot of information and it's a little on the dry side, but it is important, very important information. Seeing none, we will move to Steve, who will be sharing about the child protection policy.
I will try. Let's see. Are you seeing a screen that says Children and Youth Protection?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, in addition to lengthy and dry, I get to add repetitive in some respects. So where I see that I am repeating something Jean said, I'll highlight and move from there. Where you want to look on the website, you go to the Highlands website, resources and documents, forms and documents, and you can find what you need on the child protection policy. The purpose of, excuse me, I have to move you all out of the way. The Presbytery of the Highlands of New Jersey is committed to providing an environment that is a safe place for children and youth, and that will protect them from any abuse when they are involved in Presbytery-related activities. Keep your eyes on the prize. We are inquisitive people. We like to wonder and be curious. If there is any question about what you are doing or thinking about doing meets the purpose of making a safe place for children and youth, then stop where you are, make that the very first priority, and go from there. Don't pass go until you've answered that question. And if it's a question, just stop whatever you're trying to plan and answer that question. And there are any number of times when, well, we're planning an event and we have 2 adults to be with this group. Well, we'll get to that later. No, you get to that now, and then you move on. Since I can see Sarah Green, Sarah, would you mind reading what is child abuse?
Sure. An act committed by a parent, caregiver, or person in a position of trust, even though he or she may not care for the child on a daily basis, which is not accidental and which harms or threatens harm to a child's physical or mental health or welfare.
Thank you. If there is an exam, this is the answer, and we're giving you the answer because you need to get it right. Any act has to be attended to. And when you see something, and we'll go over what those somethings might be, your task is not to wonder if, but to make sure someone in authority is looking into the matter. And if it turns out to be nothing, they will determine that. But if it turns out to be something, you will play an important part in the safety of a child. So what are some of the things you should be looking for? The neglect of basic needs. Does the child not seem to be getting enough food? Is their clothing the wrong size? Or they've been wearing the same clothes every day? Or they're dirty and they aren't getting cleaned? Or the child themselves seems to be a little more dirty than you might expect. if there are signs of physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse. Those are the things to look for. And those definitions and those qualities are found in the Child and Youth Protection Policy. So if you're wondering, did Steve really say if the kid wears the same clothes every day? Yes, I did. And if you're not sure, you can look to the manual and see it. Peter Gregory, would you mind reading this screen?
In New Jersey, any person having reasonable cause to believe that a child has been abused or neglected has a legal responsibility to report it to the Division of Child Protection and Permanency, formerly Youth and Family Services.
Thank you. Is there anyone on this Zoom event who does not understand those words? Particularly, any person having reasonable cause. So if that means you have reason to wonder, then you have every responsibility to act to make sure that child is well cared for. So there's any uncertainty, any lack of clarity, please feel free to raise your hand, but any person is any person. As Jean mentioned earlier, screening is essential for full and part-time paid employees and for volunteers. And when I get contacted about this, as I often do, about who should get a background check or screening, the simple answer is anyone who works with children or vulnerable adults. Anybody. Now, we have a trunk or treat is coming up because of Halloween. That's a one-time event and they're surrounded by people in public. So on one hand, you might say, well, maybe it's not quite as essential as, say, a Sunday school teacher. On the other hand, if you think, as unfortunately I've learned to think, that small children might reach out to a reasonable looking adult and say, could you walk me to the restroom? Then you might think, yep, even this one-shot deal should have someone getting a background check. That's a gray area. And if you're going to err, I'm all for erring on the side of caution, but that is a place that's a little more challenging. But if someone works with children or vulnerable adults on any kind of a regular basis, every month you have a food pantry, that person is in too likely a position to not at least do a background check. Background checks requirements may be different, but they are non-negotiable. We have a new relationship with Ministry Safe that I'll be talking about shortly. It makes background checks easier and recording and monitoring that information easier. And then we have forms and a process in the Presbytery's policy. Don't let the perceived difficulty or expense get in the way of doing what's right. This is just the cost of doing business in the world. If you have not already implemented it, you will see that there is a 23-point code of conduct in the Presbytery's policy. Read it, be familiar with it, use it for session, deacon, other leadership training, because guess what? You must have read it because we have your signature saying that you did. So if you can't remember what you read, you're still bound by it. So you might as well know what you signed. It's meant to be clear and it's meant to be thorough. And that's why you have 23 points. If you have any questions about that, call Jean or call me. But if you have a question, don't proceed until you have that question answered. You'll also see in the policy a 2-leader policy, and I referred to that just a few moments ago. 2 adults is more than the gold standard. It is the standard. You shouldn't have any situation where there's an adult alone with one child or more than one child. But I also understand this is the real world. So when that's not possible, we have the open door policy. Not only a window in your door so anyone can look in, but a door that's left open and a leader standing by the door so that anyone walking by can see them. Not only do we want to protect everyone, we want it to be abundantly clear that everyone is being protected. The policy includes information on reporting requirements in New Jersey, the indications of abuse in fuller detail than I gave, and background information forms that you'll need for your background checks. First Timothy 4, don't let others look down on you because of your youth. The truth is the young have gifts, and so the young have responsibilities. In terms of the church, don't let others look down on you because you're a small church. Because as a church, you have gifts, and yes, that means you have responsibilities. I don't want to hear you say, and I hear it more than I want, and I bite my tongue as much as I can, we don't have many children, or we don't have any children. That is no excuse. For one thing, any one of you may have a grandchild who visits. So for that one Sunday, you have a child. Heaven forbid, I know it's crazy to think you could have a family with young children walk by and visit your church. That is not the day to say, we really should work on this stuff. You need to have shown this new family that you're already ready for their child. You have to be prepared. As Timothy says, you are to set an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. On the Highlands Presbytery website, you can find the Small Churches Children and Youth Protection Policy, Safe Church Child Protection Policies. We won't let it happen here, preventing child abuse in the church, and an abuse prevention policy resource sheet. And these are things that cover everything from soup to nuts: study materials, training, policy material, work with volunteers, a model for a brochure that you can give to families when they come. And because of the new relationship with Ministry Safe, you have access to their library of policies and safety measures that we did not have available to us a month ago. And so as you're able to go through that information, you'll start to learn more there. Having a policy is not enough, and Jean referred to this in her comments. I look at the minutes, we look at the minutes, and everybody says they have that policy. Maybe we should ask, have you read this policy in the last year? Have you all done a joint Lectio Divina on the policy in the past year? Because knowing you have a policy doesn't ensure that you've read it. But there are very good reasons why you all should be looking it over, you and your leadership. Is that policy being implemented as it should be? Do you have doors that don't have windows, even though you said you would have that taken care of? Where does the policy need to be updated? If you didn't redo this policy in the past 5 years, all the electronic material that Jean spoke of earlier, you have no reference to in your policy, because 5 years ago, people weren't thinking Zoom. And a lot of us older folks, we weren't thinking, oh, what could happen with texting or email? Well, unfortunately, we know a lot can happen. So you need to see if it needs to be updated. The session should review it for implementation and improvement, making sure that the groups that need to know are using it and know about it, and making sure new folks. I probably don't have to tell you about the Boy Scouts. They're certainly the prime example of what happens when we aren't being responsible for the people we need to be responsible for. And are parents and new people coming to the church aware of what you're doing and that you're working to improve what you're doing? Parents today go into schools and they see metal detectors and they see security guards and they see people with walkie-talkies to call for help. They want their child to be safe everywhere, not just in school. And I'm not saying you need to have all of those things, but you need to show them that you are doing everything you can, because they'll see when you aren't, and you might not see them again after that. One of the big transitions in the presbytery over the past month has been our new relationship with Ministry Safe. Many of you would have received an email yesterday from Sonia that gives you the information you need to access and set up your Ministry Safe account. And the reason I say for elders on session and more is, as we will see, those who are on session are obligated to do this training, required by the Book of Order. But you have Sunday school teachers, you have youth group leaders, you have volunteers of all sorts, you have deacons. You've got a number of people who are not elders on session, but whom you may believe this would be good. This would be a helpful thing. And if you saw the Boundary Safe video, which is available at that website that you have on the screen, one of the reasons to do all of this, to do thorough background checks, to require training, is because if there is someone who is looking to abuse a child, if they are coming to a place and they realize, holy smokes, these people are going to find me, they're not going to come to you. And we're not trying to chase them to someone else, heaven forbid. But we don't have control over the world. You have control over your church. And if they see you're doing background checks, you're going to make them do training, that people are being trained to look for potential problems, they're not going to want to stay. And not there is a good thing. If you go to ministrysafe.com/Highlands, you will find the video presentation if you missed it, or if there are other people in your leadership who need to see it. You will find the discount code that gives you free access to the control panel and that library. And that control panel allows you to see everyone who's done their training, their testing, and who hasn't. And who, if you've done a background check, that will show up. There are multiple other trainings that you may require, and you can see what trainings those are and make sure the person who's required to take them has done so. You'll find a ministry safety assessment, again, to help you think about this so vital, but sometimes so complicated. I mean, it seems like it should be so easy, but if no one said you should have a window in all of your doors, you might never think about it. So thank goodness there are people who think about these things. And so that assessment will help you there. But that code is kind of the big deal, because the control panels are actually somewhat expensive, but because of the relationship we've been able to arrange, it is free to your church.
Steve,
for
can
all
I
of
ask?
our- Yes,
Steve,
Chris.
could I ask a question? I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but at the church, yes, we have food pantry, we have, all of these various things that are going on. Okay. And for a small church, that is oftentimes most people in the congregation are involved with all of the things that are going on in the church. And if we're kind of going along these lines of background checks and doing all of this training so that, you're looking at most of the congregation having to get background checks and having to do sexual harassment training, which, that becomes a really big hump to try and get over for a congregation. If you could maybe address that idea, because I could easily come up with 50 people then that should be having background checks and doing training.
I would say that, again, the base standard is anyone who is in regular contact with children. So if your food pantry regularly has children coming, then you have to think, all right, how do we address that? And maybe it's identifying the adults who are permitted to be with children if they have children. So I don't know how your food pantry works, but
Well,
at
it might not
ours,
be such an issue for the food pantry, but I think about other things like the Women's Association going and doing, community days where they're selling cotton candy to kids and families and stuff. So do the Women's Association, do they end up having to do this because they would be interacting with children in such situations?
on a regular basis, then I guess that would be something you would have to determine. All that is required for background checks or the boundary training by the Book of Order are elders on session.
Yeah.
What we're encouraging is anybody who is in regular contact with children. We can't decide that at the presbytery level. But you could say, well, yeah, the Women's Association has 50 people on it, but there are only 5 who go to the cotton candy. Well, then those are the 5 that need to be getting all of this extra material. But if all 50 are doing it, then you're going to have to look long and hard and decide what that means for your congregation.
All right. Well, that makes it as clear as mud. Thank you.
Well, again, you need to look at your situation and see
Yeah.
who really is with kids. I think that actually makes it a lot clearer than mine.
All right. Okay. All right.
I mean,
Steve,
that's my
can I
perception.
say something
All right.
about
Thank
that?
you.
I was going to call on you, Lisa. Please do.
When I first retired, I decided I was going to volunteer at the local hospital. I went through all of this, and I had to have a background check. I had to be fingerprinted, on and on and on. I did not work with children, but I was told you could be anywhere in the hospital while you're going around. And so this was the routine thing. Everybody who volunteered at the hospital had to do this.
Thank you,
I
Lisa.
get that everybody would have to do it, and I don't disagree with doing it. I'm just thinking about the idea of having to get a group of, people who are often between 70 and 90 years old to tell them that you all have to do this, or we recommend, or we want you to do this because of your roles in the church. And I can see a lot of balking, that's all.
Well, if you give me a moment, I may give you an alternative to the bulking
Okay.
buses.
All right. I'll be quiet now.
As I said, elders on session are required to take some testing, and in consultation with Ministry Safe, there are 2 trainings and appropriate tests that we are requiring. One is the sexual abuse awareness training. That's $8. And there's the peer-to-peer sexual abuse training, which is $2. And those were recommended the first because that's, I think, patently obvious that it needs to happen. Peer-to-peer sexual abuse is one that they are seeing required by more and more insurance companies. And that's the situation where a 15-year-old is doing things with another 15-year-old. It's not an adult with a power imbalance. It's a different kind of power imbalance. And so they have recommended those 2 trainings. The cost for these trainings, they can be borne by the church. The church can say, we've got 12 people on session, and we're going to pay for all 12 of them. Or the church could say, we're going to ask each elder to pay for their own tests. That's your decision. All we care about is, that the testing is done. But that's one place of some wiggle room for you to decide. But others may be required by a session to take this training, the people this was asking about. And what you decide for the session may not be the same for the other people. So you may say, everyone who's been elected to an ordained office, we're going to pay for. But if you're a Sunday school teacher, we won't. Or we'll pay for the Sunday school teachers, but not the food pantry volunteers. You work that out. The only people we're checking are the elders who are currently on session. In the same way, there are the background checks that can be conducted directly through Ministry Safe, and they have multiple levels. And frankly, you are better off talking to Sonia about that than you are to me. But what she has discovered in her research is that the cost is comparable to what is paid for now. But thanks to the control panel that you have and the control panel we have for all of the churches, we are prepared to be able to say, if asked, yes, this person has had a background check done, and to what degree. Some of the wiggle room that I was speaking of with Chris is, for one, some of you are not part of the New Jersey Presbyterians Insurance Partnership. And so you aren't with Brown and Brown, you aren't with Guide One. And you're wondering, do you have to use ours? Well, you don't have to use ours, but ours is here for you to use. And so if you don't want to have to think about it any more than clicking on that previous website and going from there, that's there for you. But you can contact your insurance company and say, do you have this kind of training? Do you have testing that's a part of that? And you'll want to be in touch with me, because if you come back and say, well, it's a 15-minute video and there's no training afterward, I'm going to say that's not enough. So if you're going away from what we're offering, if it checks enough boxes, that's fine. But if it doesn't, we're not just going to let you slide by. One church contacted me a few weeks ago as things were still developing. They have a different insurer. They checked, and their insurer has a decent video program. And if your insurer approves of it, that's a good sign. But there was no testing involved. There was no accountability. And so one of the things that I suggested that they seemed agreeable to is, and this is something I was thinking of as Chris was asking his questions, they're having an event, and they're going to have all of the elders come together. They're going to watch the video together, and they're going to record in the session minutes. These are all the people who were there. And so if something, heaven forbid, should happen, we can say, whatever else happened, this person did do the boundary training. Their session has verified it. Now, whatever happens, happens. But you have, to the degree anybody can focus on such things, you've done the things you need to do. And we as a presbytery have done the things we need to do. Since most of you here are pastors, I'll also tell you, just so you can be in rhythm with your clerk, is that the way the presbytery is going to ensure that this is taking place the way it should is every month at your session meeting, you will be asked to say, okay, who took the boundary training? Now, you will have an administrator at your church who could look that up. So that will be the alternative. But every month should be a list of anybody who took the boundary training since your last meeting. And then in the last meeting of the calendar year, whether that's November, December, or October, whatever you do, you would have a cumulative list of all of the people who've taken boundary training who are on session. If you want to include the teachers, the volunteers, knock yourself out. It's a good use of paper. But if all you list are the 12 elders you have, that's all we need. But it's a way of making sure you're doing this thing that is required of us. Any questions about Ministry Safe? And if you do have any, there's a good chance talking to Sonia is your better bet. But I'm glad to field them now. And if she's still here, she can weigh in. Okay. Well, there will be plenty of time and chance for you to look over that email and follow the link that's there, to watch the video, to read about it. We've already had some questions and comments, so off we go. You'll notice that this says important changes to the Book of Order as of July 9th, 2023. And I would love to think that all of you have been following those changes. But the truth is, I speak to pastors all the time who didn't know something that kind of wish they did. So I'm going to go over these changes because you have not had boundary training since these changes took effect. Now, I'll go through them quickly in the hope that you do know. And I see from the first one that Jean's already touched on it. So you can see that it is in the Book of Order that all councils, session, presbytery, synod, general assembly, shall adopt and implement the following policies. And this means independent, separate policies: sexual misconduct policy, harassment policy. I like to think of it as an anti-harassment policy, a child and youth protection policy, and an anti-racism policy. And that will be with boundary training, including sexual misconduct, child sexual abuse prevention, for every member of the session of the council, at least every 36 months. So if you're doing the math, every 36 months means if you do it at the beginning of your first term and you're reelected to a second term, guess what? We do what we can to make it different. I don't pretend to believe that people remember my sermon from a month ago, let alone a year ago, let alone 3 years ago. Somehow or another, you will have training available to you every 36 months for your elders. Trust and confidentiality. We are working to create communities of trust, accountability, and confidentiality while protecting the vulnerable. This came in response to the resolution on sexual misconduct in the PCUSA, which included words or sentences like, "Our privilege of confidentiality is not an invitation to sweep abuse under the rug, protect the institution, or to protect perpetrators of misconduct. The scriptures are clear. Our mandate to protect the vulnerable and the victimized is greater than our responsibility to those who hold power. We are here for the vulnerable." It goes on to say, in light of these biblical mandates, when talking about confidence and privilege, it's essential that we begin with protecting the vulnerable. Concerns about the need for confidence in pastoral care and to confess sin do not outweigh the need to protect those who have been victimized. Ministers of the Word and Sacrament, commission ruling elders can hold in confidence shall hold in confidence all information revealed to them in the course of providing care, except when the person whose confidences are at issue gives consent to reveal confidential information, but cannot be compelled to reveal confidential information, or when a minister of the Word or Sacrament or commission ruling elder reasonably believes that there is a risk of imminent bodily harm to any person. Someone can say, "Can you keep this quiet? Can you keep this a secret?" There are limits to that. There are limits to that. I believe Jean mentioned this earlier, but just to remind you that it is not just members of councils, but those who are under care of the presbytery to become ministers of Word and Sacrament, commissioned ruling elders, certified Christian educators, they too have to have this training every 36 months. And it's up to the presbytery to decide what's acceptable. This is about inquirers and candidates. In the past, unfortunately, it's a very siloed system. Seminaries don't have to talk to presbyteries. Presbyteries don't have to talk to seminaries. And sessions didn't have to talk to anybody. That's not true anymore. From the time an individual is enrolled as an inquirer candidate, the session shall report to the presbytery any matters of sexual misconduct. So this is one of those things people say, "Oh, you make it so hard. I have to think so much." You don't have to think about this at all. You become aware of something, you shall report it, and then we will act accordingly. Those are the changes to the previous book of order, we have a current book of order that is now coming before the presbyteries. These are just quick notes of things to be aware of. We're not going to talk about them. The addition of adults with vulnerabilities, not just children and youth, but adults with vulnerabilities. Jean mentioned this in terms of what the presbytery's policies require. If some offense should occur, the clerk shall report to civil legal authorities any knowledge of harm or risk of harm related to the physical abuse, neglect, and or sexual molestation or abuse of a minor or an adult lacking mental capacity. So in the past, that might have been a should, or it would be good if you did. It's a now, you shall, I shall, the clerk of session shall. Excuse me. Administrative leave is a particular class of action by a presbytery. In the past, some things were left to the generosity of those involved, but now we can see that there's a paid administrative leave and a means by which that would be accounted for. And so the cost shall be borne either by the church, the employing entity, or perhaps even shared by the presbytery. Again, because we have not had this training with you in the past 3 years, I'm going to try and go quickly through what an important document that I hope you'll at least browse through if you have the opportunity. And that is church discipline, which is the last portion of the Book of Order. It used to be called the Rules of Discipline. It's now called church discipline. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is because the whole reason you're here, the whole reason we have boundary training is because sometimes people exceed the boundaries. And research has shown that regularly required training is the most effective way of preventing sexual misconduct and abuse in the church. Part of that is a reminder that transgressions against the Book of Order, the Bible, the Book of Confessions will be treated seriously. And that is why we have a permanent judicial commission. And I guess that's why you have a stated clerk, to make sure those things happen or don't happen. And as I said earlier, one of the best means of prevention is knowing what will happen, knowing the signs of something that could be happening. Those things make you a less attractive target. This is one that I feel strongly, well, let me not jump ahead. There are two kinds of offenses. One is against the council. You think that the session, the presbytery, the synod, or the general assembly acted in a way they shouldn't have, which is an act of commission, or they have failed to act in a way they should have, which is an act of omission. Those are against the council. The other is a disciplinary case, which is against an individual. And that is an act or omission by a member of a congregation or minister of word and sacrament, contrary to the scriptures, the constitution of the Presbyterian Church. Do or don't do. Any action or omission can be the subject of an allegation. So people will say, well, we didn't do anything. Well, that could be the problem. Maybe you were supposed to do something. Or we only did what we thought was right. Well, maybe what you thought was right is not what someone else thinks is right. Actions of omission or commission. This is the piece that I wanted to jump in on. Who may file an allegation? I was on an investigating committee for the Synod of the Northeast, and I was unpleasantly surprised to discover how many people didn't know about filing allegations. Who may file an allegation? First, any member of the Presbyterian Church USA, anybody. Some kid's just been confirmed and they think something wrong has happened and they decide they want to file an allegation. They are a member. someone who's a brand new member, they are a member. And anyone who is not a member of the Presbyterian Church USA may request that a member file a written allegation on their behalf. And if you happen to be the recipient of an allegation from someone who is not a member, you have to act on it. You can say, I didn't think it was that big a deal. I was there, I saw it, it wasn't that big a deal. You are neither the judge nor the jury. You are there as a member of the church who has received a message of concern from someone else. And what happens after that happens. But if someone gives that to you in good faith, that is important. That means really anybody can file an allegation. Now, I'm grateful that we have time off, that we can go on vacation. You are never on vacation from being a Christian or being a member of the Presbyterian Church. In one of my trainings, we heard about a family went to Disney World, and weren't they shocked to see, well, let's just say, the church secretary and the organist there together. And they apparently were friendlier than they or their spouses knew. The people who saw that were well within their rights to file an allegation. Because even though they weren't at home, they weren't in church, they really had nothing to do with them being there. If they felt that that warranted an allegation being filed, it's well within their reasons and rights to do so. Now, nothing is, I'm not saying they should or shouldn't. I'm just saying it's within their rights to do so. Excuse me. What starts the process of an investigation or a disciplinary process? It begins when a written statement alleging that an active member of a congregation or a minister of word and sacrament has committed an offense, and that's submitted to the clerk of session or the stated clerk of the presbytery, having jurisdiction over the member. If you get something, you have to do something. Excuse me. If somebody gets a napkin and writes an allegation on the back of it and signs their name, you have to give it to your clerk or you have to give it to me. If you give it to me and I think it should go to your clerk, I will make sure it does. If it goes to your sessions clerk and they aren't sure what to do with it, have them call me and we can talk. But they will be doing something with it because you have to do something with it. But if you're a pastor watching this, they're likely going to come to you and say, what do I do? Your first response is, call Steve, because you have to do something with it. You can't sit on it. And whatever happens, keep a paper trail, electronically or otherwise, because everything can become part of an investigation. And in case you think I'm saying this just to be helpful to the person who's upset about something and wants to file an allegation, what I learned in my time on the investigating committee is if you are given an allegation and you do not act on it, guess what? You have violated the Constitution and you may be subject to disciplinary action because it's your job to make sure it's passed on. So it's not just, oh, I'm being nice or I don't want to get anybody in trouble. If you don't do it, you might be the one who's in trouble. Now, Gene, I think, alluded to this. I've had so many conversations about such things today. After a while, they start to blur together. But let me say this. The judicial process is only one way to address a grievance. People can be encouraged to apologize. They can be encouraged to make restitution, go to training. Those things are all true. If you receive an allegation, none of those things are your problem. None of them. Doesn't matter how well informed you are, how much you believe people, none of those things matter. If you receive an allegation, you pass it on and it's handled appropriately. And if you're right, hopefully the right thing happens. If you're wrong, good thing the wrong thing didn't happen. But it's up to the judicial process to determine that. You aren't the judge, you aren't the jury, you are just someone sharing information. You don't even need to, in fact, not only do you not need to, you should not talk to the people who have been identified as involved. You're not there to tell them anything or warn them that it's coming. You just pass the information on. While you all think about whether you have any questions or comments to make, a reminder that the website has the denominational and presbytery policies. We have a number of workshops, resources, and videos available. There's a 3-hour standards of ethical conduct training that is up, and there'll be a way you can break down the trainings into more manageable bites. There's boundary training for sessions that I believe is the ministry safe video that is now available through that link. And the manual of operations, there's a video about that, as well as a lot of information on the Clerk of Sessions page, just to make sure you have all of the policies that you should have available and ready. Things in the manual of operations should not be, where did we leave that? Let's look around. In case of emergency, you should know exactly where those things are to grab them, electronically or physically or both. So if you have any questions about, do we need that? Do we have that? Go to that video and those resources. Does anybody have any last questions? For me, Jean has more to share. I am not seeing any. So, Jean, I'd like to turn things back over to you.
Sorry, actually, I do have a question.
Oh, okay.
What if there's an allegation, but it is not brought to the pastor, but is between two members? And is
If
never
it's
reported to the pastor?
Well, if one of those people feels that they should file an allegation, they just need to write it and hand it to the clerk. One of them would have to feel that that was appropriate. Or if they came to you as the pastor and said, I don't want to get you involved, but I'm having a real problem with Joe Schmo, you can say, well, we could talk with Joe Schmo because you haven't filed an allegation, but it's within your power to file an allegation. And depending on what the concern is, that may be the most appropriate course of action. So if they're having a disagreement, then talking to the pastor makes a lot of sense.
Well, this
If
is with a
Joe-
child abuse situation.
Oh, right to the clerk, right to the police. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Steve, I have one more question for you.
Please.
What about in situations of elder abuse? When something like this comes about? Because I had a situation in which that was happening from a family member, and it was pretty severe. And I got in touch with authorities, and they put me from one department to another department to another department, finally got to the place, and I was told, well, she has to report it, you can't. And she was too scared to. So in those situations of elder abuse, are we still mandatory reporters, seeing that the system doesn't really seem to support our role in that?
Well, the first thing I would say is the Book of Order is an amendment is before us to vote on adding vulnerable adults, and that would include senior citizens who would be more vulnerable. I would probably turn to Jean for her response, because I can tell you I had something like that come up in Pennsylvania. And when I called our Senior Citizens Protection Agency or whatever they're called. They called me back within a day or two to say they had investigated it. So I don't know what happens in New Jersey. I'm glad to say in Pennsylvania they responded very quickly. Gene, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if any other New Jersey person would know more than I do.
I do not have enough to know if the New Jersey has that same structure as Pennsylvania and New York, because I was pastor in New York. That do any of the other pastors have that experience?
Arlene Romaine is saying there is an
An
elder abuse hotline.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
but-
and I had an experience of needing to call Adult Protective Services for someone in my congregation, and they were actually very helpful and responsive. Mine was a slightly different kind of situation. It was more questioning mental capacity of someone who is living alone and therefore
Yeah.
unable to be caring adequately for herself. So slightly different. And the same thing happened. Someone else was the reporter of it, but for another congregant, and they were actually very responsive in
I could see them
investigating and
being
then taking action. So I don't know, government agencies, it's like I'm surprised and also not surprised to hear your
Well, this
yeah.
situation was a little bit, it was a kind of a sticky wicket, the whole thing. So I mean, it wasn't just kind of that cut and dry, but okay, well, hopefully the change is going to come to the Book of Order, and then we do become essentially mandated reporters for such situations, but it's just simply going to depend on what state policies are in place for what it is that we can actually do.
We'll try to find that information out and put it on our webpage so we have that resource, because I think it'd be helpful to have that all in one place, like an elder abuse kind of thing. Carol, I see your hand.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Carol Howard, and I'm new to the Presbytery. I just wanted to say I was the chair of the Survivors Task Force of Clergy Sexual Misconduct. And as I met with, our task force was responsible for a lot of these changes in the Book of Order. And I know it's kind of a pain, and it's frustrating to have to deal with, but each of these things came about because of issues, because of abuse that occurred, when people would take youth groups out to a camp or whatever. It wasn't always the pastor. It was oftentimes an elder or someone else in the congregation who didn't always know. So I just bring that up because I just want to thank you all for being involved in this and for having your congregations involved, and just to know that that all of this comes out of just a lot of pain and heartache. And I'm also really proud of our denomination. We're the only denomination that actually got victims together to ask them how we could respond better to their situation and to misconduct in general. And this is what came out of it. So thank you for being part of that faithful response.
Thank you for your work in getting us to that point and reminding us just how big and vital this discussion is. Any other questions for me before we turn things back over to Gene?
I'd like to make a comment. I'm Jim Fosher, and I'm retired, and I spent my career primarily as a New Jersey licensed marriage and family therapist. And one of the things that I noticed here that I think is a learning experience is that when you start talking to somebody that might know something, you're likely to find a trail to the right place. So the gentleman who said he called the police, and they got one after another. Sometimes you want to call somebody else outside of that particular system just to find some information. The discussion between things that went on here gave several ideas of places that you could go to get information to help you make a better decision about what you might want to do in that situation. Turns out to be very helpful. So so this discussion, this whole evening discussion that we're having, is setting up some of that training, in a sense, by sharing these ideas.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate your comments.
All right. So let's go to our last section. And this is on our document that is Standards of Ethical Conduct for Ministers of the Word and Sacrament. In our ethical standards, we have 3 sections. And the first one is, I will conduct my life in a manner that is faithful to the gospel and consistent with public ministry. The second one is, I will conduct my ministry so that nothing need be hidden from a governing body or colleagues in ministry. And the third section is, I will participate as a partner with others in the ministry and mission of the Church Universal. So we'll go quickly through each of those sections. In the introduction to our ethical standards is, as an ordained minister in the PCUSA, there is also, this is focused on ministers, but there is an ethical standards for ruling elders also, but that is not in our policy, but there is one, then you can find it on the PCUSA website. As an ordained minister in the PCUSA, in obedience to Jesus Christ, under the authority of Scripture and guided by our confessions, I affirm the vows made at my ordination, confirm that Jesus Christ is the pattern for my life and ministry, and relying on God's grace, commit myself to the following standards of ethical conduct. I will conduct my life in a manner that is faithful. And in this section, you will see, practice the disciplines of prayer, study, reflection, worship, stewardship, and service. Be honest and truthful in my relationship with others. Be faithful in keeping the covenants I make and honoring marriage vows. Treat all persons with equal respect and concern as beloved children of God. Maintain a healthy balance among the responsibilities of my office of ministry, my commitments to family and other primary relationships, and my need for spiritual, physical, emotional, and intellectual renewal. Refrain from abusive, addictive, or exploitative behavior and seek help to overcome such behavior if it occurs. Refrain from gossip and abusive speech, and maintain an attitude of repentance, humility, forgiveness, and responsive of God's reconciling will. So that's the first section. Is there any quick comments or questions? All right, the second one is, I will conduct my ministry so nothing needs to be hidden. Preach, teach, and bear witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ with courage, speaking the truth in love. Honor the sacred trust of relationships within the covenant community and observe appropriate boundaries. Be judicious in the exercise of power and privilege of my office and positions of responsibility I hold. Do not abuse that privilege. That is sometimes where pastors go over the edge. That's going over the boundaries. Avoid conflicts of interest that might compromise the effectiveness of my ministry. Refrain from exploiting relationships within the community of faith for personal gain or gratification, including sexual harassment and misconduct as defined by the PCUSA and the Presbytery's policy, sexual misconduct and anti-harassment policies. Respect the privacy of individuals and not divulge information obtained in confidence without express permission, unless an individual is in danger to self or others, and as required by the state of New Jersey and the Book of Order. Or whatever state you're in, I should also say. Refrain from incurring indebtedness that might compromise my ministry. This sometimes is a serious thing that causes pastors to have some boundary issues. And if you do feel that you have a lot of indebtedness or have trouble with financial management, that kind of thing, the Board of Pensions provides educational assistance in dealing with debt and with other personal financial issues. They have webinars, they have people who can work with you. So just be aware of that sometimes our need to get out of debt and to just maintain sometimes, because we know pastors are not necessarily the highest paid people in the neighborhood, there is assistance and resources for you. Number 10 is be a faithful steward of and fully account for funds and property entrusted to me. It's important that there is transparency in if the church allows you to have a pastor's discretionary fund or access to funds for special missions or something like that. Don't keep that in secret. Don't get caught up in that. There should always be transparency. And I actually recommend that you do not necessarily not have a discretionary fund, but that still has to go through the usual accounting procedures for checks to be written, that kind of thing, that you don't have your own personal checking account for that. And if you have questions on that, give me a call sometime, we can talk. Observe limits set by the appropriate governing body for honoraria, personal business endeavors, and gifts or loans from persons other than family. And we have an addendum to that, which we'll get to. Accept the discipline of the church and the appropriate guidance of those to whom I am accountable for my ministry. Just remember that this is an ordination vow, that you will accept the discipline of the church. Participate in continuing education and seek the counsel of mentors and professional advisors, coaches, therapists, that kind of thing, and use your Con Ed money. Seek out the things that will challenge you. Seek out the things that feed your soul. Going to the shore for 2 weeks to read might be nice, but it may not be a big enough challenge, and it may not necessarily fill your soul. But use that Con Ed money and look for ways that you are growing in your ministry, because when you're feeling stagnant or caught and you can't grow and feel like you're unfulfilled, again, that's where boundaries start to blur. Deal honorably, is number 14, with the record of my predecessor, and upon leaving ministry or office, speak and act in ways that support the ministry of my successor, especially if you are still living in the community. It is so easy to get caught up in bad-mouthing your predecessor because they may do something you didn't like or something like that. No matter what your predecessor does, whether it's the interim pastor or the next pastor after that, do not badmouth your predecessor. Just keep your mouth shut. Like my grandmother used to say, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything. And never speak disparagingly of your successor. Participate in the life of ministry setting. Participate in the life of ministry setting I left, or from which I have retired, only as directed by the presbytery. And the presbytery directs you to totally leave the setting. You are no longer the pastor, and you are released from pastoral responsibilities of and to that congregation. When you don't do that, you do more harm than good for the congregation and for the next pastor. You make it very hard for the next pastor to bond with that congregation if you keep coming back for a funeral or showing up for events, that kind of thing. Leave this ministry setting. And the Board of Pensions again has tools for those who are retiring on how to leave well and thrive in your next phase of life. But do not leave the ministry setting totally. Provide pastoral services for a congregation I previously served only as directed by the presbytery, and provide pastoral services to members of other congregations only with the consent of their pastors. And again, I've already said the presbytery directs you to stay away from your former church and to be very respectful of other pastors in their settings. Number 17, consult with the Committee on Ministry in the Presbytery of my residence regarding my involvement in any ministry resetting during my retirement. And if you move to another presbytery, move your membership. Get involved. You still have gifts if you're retired or you're just a member at large. You still have gifts. Share those gifts with the presbytery in which you now reside. The addendum, which I came back to honoraria, several years ago, this became an issue. And so there is, in the ethical standards, there is some, what we feel is an interpretation of the limits set by the presbytery. And I will go over it. You can read that in the ethical standards document, but we did set some guidelines and some limits to appropriate honoraria and such. The other one, this is his interpretation of number 14, 15, 16, and 17 about leaving a church. This is a retirement ethics and former congregations. The Book of Orders Ethical Standards officiate by invitation only, which is G 20905, applies to retired ministers, but it does also apply to ministers in active service. Former pastors and associate pastors shall not provide pastoral services to members of their former congregations without the invitation of the moderator of the session. So out of consideration for the next pastors and the life of that congregation, it is critical that former pastors politely and unconditionally decline all such invitations that come directly from church members. It is not appropriate at any time for former pastors to respond to church members by saying they would be willing, pending an official invitation. Rather, they should decline and then let the new pastor or session moderator take the initiative if that person is so inclined. Do not put the new pastor or the session moderator on the spot. Don't make them out to be the bad person in this. Be respectful and just decline. If you have issues about that, and a lot of you have, both, pastors who've left and retired pastors have called and said, I'm in this situation, what do I do? Let's talk. So let's talk about it if you don't know what to do. And we can talk about that. Fred, I see your hand is raised. You got a question?
Yeah, actually, this policy still leaves a difficulty. If the church member is aware that it's possible for a previous minister to be invited, especially when you're new in that church, it really puts a lot of pressure on you as the new minister to have a member come to you. Well, I had this minister, for X number of years. He really knows us, blah, blah, blah. And it really puts the minister in an awkward position. I wish this were stated, unequivocally, that simply that previous ministers are not to go back and do anything. Because
that would be great, but the Book of
Yeah.
Order doesn't quite give us that authority. But
Yeah.
we are saying it is the pastor's ethical standard to say no.
yeah,
So we're not putting it on the church members. They don't live in that same world as pastors do. It is the pastor, the former pastor, the pastor who's leaving. It is your responsibility to decline and to say no. Do it as gently as possible. Tell them that you still love them, but you want to support the new pastor by stepping back and letting the new pastor lead the congregation. So it really should be on the pastor to be the one who declines, and not put it on the present pastor or on the church member. It does get difficult. I agree.
it kind of does. I'm glad there's this phrase about, that the previous minister shouldn't say, I would be willing if there's an official invitation. That I'm glad that statement is in there. That minister's not supposed to say that. I had a situation in an interim where a member actually submitted her resignation from the church that she had been part of for her whole life because she had been told by the previous minister that he was prohibited from conducting her funeral if she was a member of that church. And so that was yeah,
I'd like to
that
raise
was
my
really,
hand if I may,
yeah.
because that was me.
Oh, hi,
All right.
Ben.
That was me. I think it's important, and Fred, I understand what you're saying, and I was obviously part of that. I think it's important, however, that we also said in our ordination vows and our installation vows that we all said, will you be a friend among your comrades in ministry, working with them subject to the ordering of God's word and spirit? Will you be a friend among your comrades? Now, I personally don't think the policy written by a presbytery abrogates the kinds of vows we took in our ordination or installation. I think there's nothing in our policy that prevents the former pastor and the present pastor to call one another on the phone and talk with one another as friends in ministry and work some of these things out. I think that it's important for all of us to understand, and I understand, Fred, everything you're saying. Hear my position. When you've known somebody for 40 years, that counts for something. And Christians, we cannot say that a policy is simply more important than a relationship, necessarily, every time verbatim. So I would suggest that that can be a softer interpretation of these things. And there are times in history, and I think to be a successful pastor of a congregation, sometimes you just look the other way. It just makes things better to look the other way. I have done that in my ministry, and it worked. I can give a lot of examples of that.
Well,
But I just want to say it's just not so cut and dry that you sever friendships. You sever friendships of decades, and frankly, at some point we got to figure out who's the consumer here. Is it our members? Is it the outgoing pastor or the incoming pastor? I mean, or the church? Who is the consumer? And I would say there's a lot of stakeholders.
Ben,
Yes.
as I think we can, from hearing what your experience and Fred's experience and other pastors who've left churches, This is not an easy thing.
It isn't.
This is very hard. And so as a presbytery, we're going to err on the side of helping the congregation bond with the new pastor and try to support those who've left in a new ministry or a new phase of their life. And it's not easy. And I think that we do have to put down some standards somehow. And there's always room for conversation.
There is. And, you know,
Yeah.
the person the Fred's referring to is a 95-year-old woman whose 98-year-old husband was comatose. And I'm the person that would visit her every single week for 3.5 years. And, you know, I think actually, listen, I have one more thing to say, and then I'll shut up. I think if you were to poll human beings or Christians or Presbyterians, is it a decent thing for somebody to visit a woman who's 95 years old every single week? He would work around his own schedule to do that. You know, most human beings on the face of the planet would say, you know, that's kind of a nice thing. And if it breaks a rule, you look the other way.
Well, I'm going to move us on, Fred, Ben. Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. I've said my piece.
Thank you. The General Assembly Standard of Ethical Conduct requires ministers to live by the following affirmations. I will deal honorably with the record of my predecessor upon leaving a ministry of office and speak in ways that support the ministry of my successor. I will participate in the life of ministry setting I left, or from which I have retired only as directed by the presbytery. I will provide pastoral services for a congregation I previously served only as directed by the presbytery, and provide pastoral services to members of other congregations only with the consent of their pastors, and consult with the Committee on Ministry in the presbytery of my residence regarding my involvement in any ministry setting during my retirement. This comes from the General Assembly Standards, which we have adopted into ours. Just so you know, it isn't something we, Highlands did. It came up with that. So minister members who retire or leave a congregation of the Presbytery of Highlands are required to sign the dissolution and separation covenant. The covenant reinforces these ethical standards and book of order requirements. So you are required, all pastors leaving any church are required to sign this dissolution and separation covenant. Retired or former pastors may also may not moderate session or congregational meetings or serve as an interim, installed, or temporary supply pastor without the permission of the Committee on Ministry. And that's just really for any position, you do have to have permission of the Committee on Ministry. We've had some discussion. Are there any additional questions about section 2? All right, move on to section 3. I will participate as a partner with others in the ministry and mission of the Church Universal. Will you be a colleague in ministry? And this is kind of what Ben was talking about. But to be a colleague in ministry, participate in the mission and the governance of the Presbyterian Church USA, and work for the unity of the Holy Catholic Church. Show respect and provide encouragement for colleagues in ministry. Recruit church members responsibly, respect existing congregational relationships, and refrain from exploiting persons in vulnerable situations, and cooperate with those working in the world for justice, compassion, and peace, including partners in ministry of other faith traditions. Are there any questions or comments on that? Are there any just general questions or comments on there? I see there. Now's your chance. If you do, like, you afterwards, you're like, I got some questions about ethical standards, or, what about a very specific situation? Call Steve, call me. We'll talk it through with you, or call a colleague and say, help me understand this. This is what we're here for. Any questions about the training and boundary training in general? Hannah Fay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We were supposed to have received a certificate of completion of 2 separate sections, correct?
Sonia, is
Or
that
did it-
correct? Is that correct?
I
Sonia's-
can get all the certificates, which I'll send to you tonight. If you've completed the last 2, I'll send you a total completion.
Okay, someone from the company itself emailed me directly because they said I filled out my account incorrectly or something, and they were trying to fix it, and they wanted to know what presbytery I was with. So I just don't have a lot of faith that I did it correctly, and that's why I just want to see what you have on record for me.
I don't have anything on record, but I'll reach out to them. Okay.
Any other, technical questions like that?
I would just say that when I finished mine last night, the second one, it didn't give me an option to print any certificate.
Yeah, for some
It's-
reason, the second one doesn't pop up as easy as the first one, but I can go in there and download it. It's there.
Okay, because I didn't get a certificate for the first one either. It does show that I completed them.
Yep, and I have you down as having completed them.
If you have any technical questions like that after you finish and you're like, I really want that certificate, we have record of it because Sonia sees it. And it does go into your file that you have completed it, and Sonia keeps very good records. And when your turn comes around in 36 months, you will be notified and you will get do that. But if you have technical questions, contact Sonia, and she will help you navigate the dashboard on those things and through the system. All right. Well, thank you. For those of you who are clergy, you should have it completed by tomorrow night. Those of you who are retired pastors, you have till the end of November to get it done, because we had to include some of the retired pastors when we approved the anti-harassment policy. So they got started later. So you have till the end of November to complete that portion of it. So thank you, everybody. And Steve is going to close us in prayer.
Friends, let's pray. Holy One, it is hard for us to always know what the right thing to do is. We wish life were simple sometimes, that it was do the right thing or do the wrong thing. But the truth is, sometimes things are more gray. But you don't leave us to our own devices. Your Spirit fills us. Your Spirit fills the people around us, the church around us, the entire Presbyterian Church and more, with people who can help us stay on your path, even when we're not entirely sure. Make us weak enough to ask for help. Make us strong enough that we can accept it, and that we can accept that we don't always know all the answers. And give us the courage to trust those who have spent a lot of time thinking about things we would rather not. Not that we can't question, but that we can trust their good intentions. We can trust their hope for us. For this night, for the faith and ministry that has brought us to this place, for the church we can rely on. We give you thanks and we give you praise. Amen.
Amen.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good job.